Ma'am, if you cannot pay $3.85 right now, you need to step out of the line immediately. There are 8 paying customers waiting behind you, and we do not tolerate people wasting our store's time. I know I have my wallet somewhere in my coat pocket, so please just give me 2 minutes to check my shopping bag. I have already given you 4 full minutes, and security will escort you out to the curb if you do not step away from the cash register this second. The harsh voice of the shift manager at Midtown Market echoed across the crowded supermarket aisles at 6:15 on a rainy Tuesday evening. The elderly African-American woman standing at the counter trembled softly, her worn canvas coat damp from the cold Atlanta downpour outside. Her delicate hands searched frantically inside her faded handbag, searching for a wallet that she had accidentally left on her bedroom nightstand. Nearby, a burly security guard stepped forward, reaching out to grab the old woman's elbow to physically force her toward the exit doors. "Put your hands off her right now, Robert." Marcie Vance dropped her mop handle, the heavy plastic bucket sloshing dirty soapy water onto her scuffed leather work boots. The 29-year-old janitor reached deep into her front jacket pocket, pulling out 3 crumpled $1 bills, 3 quarters, a dime, and 2 dirty pennies. She thrust the exact sum of $3.85 onto the conveyor belt directly into the astonished cashier's palm. She gently grabbed the fresh loaf of hot Southern cornbread, placing it carefully into the old woman's shaking, spotted hands with a warm, protective smile. "Young lady, you do not even know who I am. I know you are hungry, ma'am, and I know that nobody in this city should ever be humiliated over a $3 loaf of bread. You just violated core company policy by interfering with cashier operations and causing a public scene on the sales floor, Marcie. Hand over your name tag, collect your personal belongings from the break room locker, and consider yourself indefinitely suspended without pay effective this exact minute." "Robert, I spent my very last dollars so an elderly woman would not be thrown into the freezing rain. That is not a policy violation, that is simply being a decent human being. Being human is not in the employee handbook, so turn in your keycard and leave the building before security escorts you out as well." Marcie stood frozen under the buzzing fluorescent lights, watching her manager walk away while holding the $3.85 that represented her entire dinner budget for the night. She did not cry, nor did she lower her eyes in shame as the surrounding shoppers stared in cold, uncomfortable silence. What Marcie Vance did not know at that fateful moment was that the $3.85 she had just given away would set off a chain reaction that would shatter her entire reality. She had no idea that the quiet woman holding the warm loaf of bread was the mother of one of the most powerful corporate titans in the United States. Every single decision we make in our darkest hours leaves an invisible mark upon the tapestry of our destinies. Sometimes, spending your last few copper coins on a helpless stranger can tear down empires or build brand new futures from the ashes of despair. This is the unbelievable true story of how a disgraced grocery store janitor transformed a single act of mercy into a multi-billion-dollar legacy. It all began in a cramped 410-square-foot basement apartment in West End, Atlanta. 2 hours after being stripped of her uniform badge, Marcie sat quietly at a rickety wooden kitchen table, watching her 7-year-old daughter Maya color in a frayed storybook. The little girl breathed with a faint rhythmic wheeze that made Marcie's heart tighten with sickening anxiety every few seconds. On the table lay an unpaid utility notice, showing an outstanding balance of $92.40, due by 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Marcie stroked her daughter's soft braids, burying her own overwhelming exhaustion beneath a bright, reassuring smile that hid the terrifying truth. She had worked 27.5 grueling hours every single week at $13.75 an hour just to keep a leaky roof over their heads. She took on extra night shifts, scrubbed grease off commercial stove hoods, and skipped dozens of meals so that Maya could have fresh fruit and liquid asthma medication. When Maya asked why her mother was not eating dinner tonight, Marcie gently kissed her forehead and told her a comforting, sacred lie. She whispered that champions only ate one big meal a day because their stomachs were filled with energy powered by giant dreams. She was a woman of extraordinary resilience, possessing an unyielding sense of personal dignity that no amount of poverty could ever extinguish. Before her mother passed away from cancer and medical debt destroyed their savings, Marcie had completed 3 semesters of business accounting at Atlanta Technical College. She knew how to audit balance sheets, analyze compound interest rates, and structure complex financial forecasts with remarkable mathematical precision. Yet the unforgiving reality of corporate hiring practices had pushed her into the shadows, leaving her talents buried beneath mop buckets and bleach bottles. 3 miles away, in the elevated luxury of a 38th-floor penthouse in Buckhead, Julian Sterling stood alone before a sweeping wall of tempered glass. The 38-year-old CEO of Sterling Capital stared out at the glittering neon lights of the city skyline, holding an untouched crystal glass of sparkling mineral water. His custom-tailored charcoal suit fit his broad, muscular frame impeccably, yet his dark eyes reflected an inescapable, heavy sorrow that no amount of wealth could cure. His private equity firm managed $4.2 billion in institutional assets, yet he felt completely hollow inside his pristine marble sanctuary. Julian took a slow, deep breath as his mind drifted back 26 years into the haunting corridors of his childhood memories. He could still vividly hear the harsh, metallic clatter of an iron bucket handle swinging against his mother's bruised shins in the dark hours before dawn. His mother Evelyn had scrubbed commercial office floors for 32 long years, destroying her knee joints so that he could sit in air-conditioned Ivy League lecture halls. She had suffered a humiliating, traumatic breakdown after being falsely accused of stealing a cheap silver pen from an executive desk during her night shift. That traumatic memory remained an unhealed wound inside Julian's soul, driving him to achieve immense wealth while making him deeply suspicious of corporate arrogance. He dedicated his life to protecting his mother from the world's cruelty, building an elite security team and offering her private chauffeurs and luxury estates. Yet Evelyn Sterling stubbornly rejected the lavish lifestyle her son provided, preferring to wear simple cotton dresses and walk through working-class neighborhoods alone. She refused to forget where she came from, constantly reminding Julian that a person's true value was found in their character, not their bank account. Back in the dim basement apartment, Marcie carefully folded her unpaid bills into 4 precise squares, tucking them inside her old leather wallet alongside her college transcript. She looked at her daughter, who had fallen asleep on the worn sofa, with her small hand resting trustingly against Marcie's knee. Marcie felt a fresh surge of quiet determination flood through her veins, washing away the sting of her unfair suspension from Midtown Market. She knew she would find another cleaning job by tomorrow morning, even if she had to knock on 50 doors in the freezing rain. She walked over to the small kitchen window, looking out at the dark alleyway where the storm raged against the brick buildings. She picked up a small wooden crucifix that had belonged to her grandmother, holding it tightly against her chest, while uttering a silent, desperate prayer for guidance. She did not ask for wealth, overnight miracles, or easy handouts from wealthy strangers. She simply asked for enough physical strength to work another day, enough health to raise her daughter, and enough courage to keep her head held high. At that exact same hour, a black luxury sedan pulled up to the grand iron gates of Julian Sterling's private estate in Buckhead. Evelyn Sterling stepped out of the rear seat, carrying a small paper bag containing a warm, half-eaten loaf of southern cornbread. Her eyes were bright with a strange, radiant intensity that her son had not seen in many years. As she walked up the grand stone steps into the cavernous foyer, she knew that her unexpected encounter at the grocery store was not a mere coincidence. She placed the paper bag gently onto Julian's mahogany dining table, looking directly into her son's troubled eyes with absolute conviction. She told him about the young janitor who had used her very last coins to save an old woman from public humiliation. She told him about the cruel manager who had stripped the girl of her livelihood simply because she chose to act with basic human decency. Julian listened in stunned silence as his mother declared that they were going to find Marcie Vance before the sun rose over Atlanta. The sleek black Maybach glided silently through the rain-slicked streets of West End, Atlanta at exactly 7:45 on Wednesday morning. Inside the climate-controlled cabin, Julian Sterling stared intently out the tinted window at the weathered brick facades and decaying brownstones lining the avenue. His chief of security, Marcus Cole, sat in the front passenger seat with an iPad displaying Marcie Vance's complete background file. The digital document revealed every painful detail of her financial struggles, including her incomplete academic records and her mother's catastrophic medical bankruptcy. Julian held the crumpled paper bag containing the $3.85 loaf of southern cornbread in his left hand like a sacred relic. His mother Evelyn sat beside him on the hand-stitched leather seat, her eyes fixed on the narrow alleyway leading to Building 412. She had refused to let Julian send a corporate representative or a legal team to handle this sensitive matter. She insisted that true human empathy required showing up in person, stripped of corporate shields and executive arrogance. Marcus turned around to address Julian, his voice lowered to a respectful and professional cadence. He reported that Midtown Market's corporate office had confirmed Marcie's immediate termination following last night's incident at the cash register. He added that the store manager, Robert Miller, had already logged a formal misconduct report in her employee file. Julian's jaw tightened in silent fury as he realized how easily an honest woman's reputation could be destroyed by middle management cruelty. The luxury sedan pulled up to the curb outside a dilapidated four-story building with peeling yellow paint and rusting fire escapes. Julian stepped out into the chilly morning mist, shielding his mother under a large black umbrella as they navigated the cracked concrete steps. The heavy front door was unlocked, its deadbolt long broken by years of neglect and systemic landlord indifference. They walked down a dark, narrow hallway that smelled strongly of damp mold, frying oil, and cheap bleach. They paused before apartment 1B, a cramped 410-square-foot basement unit situated right next to the noisy boiler room. Julian reached out and knocked firmly 3 times against the scratched wooden surface, the sound echoing hollowly through the dimly lit corridor. Inside, the muffled sound of a chair scraping against linoleum was followed by soft, hesitant footsteps approaching the door. A small brass peephole flickered as Marcie Vance looked out to inspect her unexpected early morning visitors. "Who is it, please?" Marcia pulled the door open 6 inches, keeping the heavy brass security chain firmly engaged in its metal slot. She was wearing a faded gray sweatshirt and black leggings, her dark hair pulled back into a neat, practical bun. Her tired eyes widened in sudden recognition as she spotted the elderly woman standing in the hallway, holding the familiar paper bag. She immediately unhooked the chain and swung the door wide open, her posture instantly shifting into one of natural, polite hospitality. "Ma'am, please come inside out of the damp hallway. Is everything all right with you today?" Evelyn walked into the tiny living area, followed closely by Julian, whose tall frame seemed to dwarf the low, water-stained ceiling. The apartment was immaculate despite its extreme modesty, with every surface dusted and every piece of worn furniture neatly arranged. On a small fold-out table in the corner sat a half-filled bowl of plain oatmeal and a children's coloring book with green crayons. 7-year-old Maya stood near the bedroom doorway, clutching a stuffed brown bear while peeking shyly at the well-dressed strangers. "Marcie, my name is Evelyn Sterling, and this is my son Julian. We came here this morning because I needed to return something that belongs to you." Julian stepped forward and placed the small paper bag alongside a crisp white envelope onto the wooden kitchen table. He looked around the tiny room, his sharp eyes taking in the unpaid utility notice resting beside a worn accounting textbook. He saw the faint rhythmic rise and fall of little Maya's chest, recognizing the distinct sound of a child struggling with untreated bronchial asthma. The stark reality of Marcie's sacrifice hit him with the force of a physical blow to his sternum. "This young lady spent her very last copper coins so that I would not be dragged out of a public store like a common thief. She gave away her family's dinner money without knowing who I was or expecting a single dime in return. When her heartless manager punished her for showing mercy, she accepted the unfair consequence with quiet, unyielding human dignity. Julian, I want you to look at this home and tell me if this is how our city rewards genuine righteousness." Julian took a slow, deep breath, his customary composure cracking beneath the weight of intense emotion. He saw his own late mother standing in Marcie's worn shoes, scrubbing floors until her knuckles bled to buy his school uniforms. He remembered the sickening shame of watching his mother weep on their kitchen floor after being wrongfully accused of stealing at work. That same haunting ghost of corporate injustice was repeating itself right before his eyes 30 years later in West End. "Miss Vance, my mother told me everything that transpired at Midtown Market last evening. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Sterling Capital, a private investment firm headquartered in Buckhead. I cannot undo the disrespect you suffered at the hands of that store manager, but I can ensure your sacrifice is properly honored. Inside that envelope is a certified bank check for $25,000 to cover your immediate living expenses and medical bills." Marcie stared at the thick white envelope resting on the table, her expression instantly hardening from warm hospitality to quiet, unbending pride. She did not reach out to touch the paper, Nor did her eyes display the wild desperation that Julian had expected to see. She stood up straight, her shoulders squared, and her dark eyes fixing Julian with an intense, unyielding gaze. She folded her arms across her chest, taking a small step back from the kitchen table. "Mr. Sterling, I appreciate you coming all the way to West End to bring your mother to see me this morning. However, I cannot and will not accept that check from you or your financial firm. I did not buy that bread for your mother because I was looking for a reward or a rich benefactor. I bought it because she was an elderly woman in distress, and my late grandmother raised me to respect human beings. I am not a charity case, Mr. Sterling, and my dignity is not for sale for $25,000. Julian stood frozen in shock, completely unprepared for a penniless janitor to flatly reject a life-changing sum of cash. In his high-stakes corporate world, every man and woman had a price that could be easily bought, sold, or negotiated. Yet here stood a woman with $92 in unpaid bills, turning down a small fortune because it felt like unearned pity. His admiration for Marcie Vance soared to heights he had never experienced in any board of directors meeting. Evelyn stepped forward, placing her gentle, spotted hand over Marcie's calloused knuckles with deep maternal affection. She looked into Marcie's eyes, seeing the fierce protective flame of a mother who refused to lower her head to any man. She turned to her son, giving him a knowing look that communicated more than 1,000 corporate strategy documents ever could. Julian immediately understood that he needed to change his entire approach if he wanted to help this extraordinary woman. "Miss Vance, I apologize for my thoughtlessness in offering you direct financial aid. My mother was right when she told me that true character cannot be bought with corporate checks or hollow charity. You possess an associate degree in accounting and an extraordinary mind for structural organization that has been completely wasted on mop handles. I am not offering you a handout, Miss Vance, but rather an invitation to earn a real future. Sterling Capital operates an elite 2-year executive development and risk management fellowship at our corporate headquarters in Buckhead. The program offers a competitive annual salary of $68,000, full health medical coverage, and intensive professional training. We receive over 4,000 applications from Ivy League graduates every single year for only 12 available seats. I want you to fill the final seat in this year's incoming class, starting next Monday morning at 8 o'clock. Marcie looked at Julian, her sharp mind immediately calculating the life-changing impact of a $68,000 salary and comprehensive health insurance. Maya could finally see a top pediatric pulmonologist, and their chronic fear of eviction would be permanently erased forever. Yet she hesitated, her ingrained caution whispering that she might be out of her depth among elite corporate executives. She looked down at her daughter, who smiled up at her with trusting, innocent brown eyes. "I have not worked in an office environment in over 4 years, Mr. Sterling. I do not own executive attire. I do not have a prestigious business degree, and I have been a night shift janitor. Are you certain you are not making a massive mistake by offering this position to someone like me? Skills and financial modeling can be taught in a classroom, Miss Vance, but integrity cannot be learned from a textbook. The kind of raw courage that makes a person spend their last $3 on a stranger is born inside the soul. That is the exact quality I need inside my corporation, and I expect to see you in my building on Monday." The towering glass and steel facade of Sterling Financial Tower gleamed brilliantly under the crisp Atlanta morning sun at exactly 7:45. Marcie Vance stood at the edge of Peachtree Road, adjusting the cuffs of her dark navy blazer, purchased from a local thrift store for $16. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, yet her posture remained upright, proud, and completely steady. She reached into her handbag to touch Maya's new asthma inhaler, drawing strength from the knowledge that her daughter was finally safe and cared for. She walked through the cavernous marble lobby, her modest leather shoes clicking softly against the polished floor toward the high-speed elevator bank. Inside Conference Room 12B on the 14th floor, 11 elite trainees sat around a 30-foot mahogany table holding leather-bound orientation binders. They were young men and women holding advanced business degrees from Harvard, Wharton, Columbia, and Stanford, dressed in custom-tailored designer suits. They looked up in cold, silent astonishment as Marcie walked into the room and took the last remaining empty chair near the end. "Is there a facilities request that needs attention? Or are you looking for the janitorial supply closet down the hall?" The sharp, condescending question came from Chadwick Hayes, a 27-year-old senior analyst wearing a $2,000 Rolex watch on his left wrist. Chadwick was a graduate of Princeton University whose father managed an influential hedge fund in Manhattan. A few trainees chuckled softly under their breath, while others looked away in uncomfortable silence as Chadwick smirked openly at Marcie's thrift store outfit. Marcie did not flinch, nor did she allow a single trace of embarrassment to show upon her calm, composure-filled face. "I am Marcie Vance, and I am the 12th fellow in this year's Executive Development and Risk Management Program." Before Chadwick could deliver another biting remark, the double-glass doors swung open, and Julian Sterling entered the room accompanied by his executive board. The room instantly fell into dead silence as the Billionaire CEO walked to the head of the table, his presence commanding absolute authority. He placed his leather portfolio onto the table, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the 12 trainees with slow, calculated intensity. He paused his gaze on Chadwick before turning his attention to the rest of the room. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the flagship leadership program of Sterling Capital. Over the past 3 days, several of you have questioned HR regarding the selection process for our final fellowship candidate. Some of you have whispered behind closed doors, while a few have dared to complain that a spot was given to someone without an Ivy League degree. I am here this morning to address those concerns directly, so there is absolute clarity regarding who belongs in this institution." Julian stepped away from the podium, walking slowly around the perimeter of the long mahogany table, with his hands folded behind his back. Miss Marcie Vance was selected for this program because she demonstrated a rare level of personal integrity that none of your flawless grade point averages can prove. 4 days ago, she spent her very last $3.85 to buy a simple loaf of bread for a helpless stranger in a supermarket. She did so without knowing who that person was, without expecting a single dime in return, and while facing severe poverty in her own home. When her employer wrongfully fired her for that act of mercy, she accepted the consequence with unyielding dignity, rather than compromising her values. In this corporation, we do not evaluate human beings merely by their social pedigree, their elite connections, or the prestige of their academic diplomas. We measure them by their ethical choices under extreme pressure, their moral courage when no one is watching, and their resilience in the face of adversity. Miss Vance possesses a strength of character that cannot be taught in business schools, and I suggest you spend less time judging her background and more time proving you deserve your own seats. A heavy silence descended upon the conference room as Julian's powerful words echoed against the glass walls, leaving Chadwick's face flushed with deep humiliation. The elite trainees looked at Marcie with a sudden, profound shift in perception, recognizing that the woman sitting among them possessed the full backing of the chief executive officer. Yet Marcie took no pleasure in Chadwick's embarrassment, remaining focused entirely on the immense responsibility that had been placed upon her shoulders. She knew that executive protection would only carry her so far in a ruthless corporate environment driven by cold numbers. Over the next 4 months, Marcie immersed herself in the grueling, fast-paced world of institutional portfolio management and corporate risk analysis. She arrived at her cubicle every morning at 6:15, nearly 2 full hours before the rest of the research division walked through the doors. She spent her lunch breaks analyzing complex financial statements, learning advanced statistical modeling algorithms, and mastering corporate tax compliance structures. While other trainees went out for expensive dinners in Buckhead, Marcie rode the MARTA bus home to review financial ledgers at her kitchen table until 2 in the morning. "You are going to completely exhaust yourself if you keep running at this brutal pace every single night, Marcie." Her motherly neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, spoke softly as she watched over little Maya, who was sleeping peacefully in her freshly painted bedroom. Marcie wiped her tired eyes, smiling gently as she closed a 500-page manual on municipal bond restructuring and urban housing development loans. "I cannot afford not to run at this pace, Mrs. Jenkins, because everyone else in that building had a 20-year head start on me. I have to work 3 times as hard just to stand on the exact same starting line, but I am doing this so Maya never has to suffer again." Her relentless work ethic and quiet humility slowly began to earn the deep respect of senior portfolio managers within the firm. When complex asset evaluations required a deep understanding of local working-class economies, Marcie provided insights that no academic textbook could ever teach. She understood how real working families spent their money, how small businesses survived inflation, and where true community value was created. While Chadwick Hayes relied on abstract computer models, Marcie analyzed the human reality behind every single financial transaction. Despite her growing success, Chadwick continued to view Marcie as an existential threat to his own ambitions for the coveted vice president position. He began monitoring her daily project logs discreetly, searching for the smallest technical mistake or procedural error that he could leverage to undermine her reputation. He bribed an administrative assistant to gain access to her draft analysis on the upcoming Kowalski Trust proposal, a multi-billion-dollar community redevelopment initiative. Chadwick was determined to prove that a former grocery store janitor had no place leading a major corporate development. One rainy Friday afternoon, Julian summoned Marcie into his private corner office, overlooking the mist-covered skyline of downtown Atlanta. He motioned for her to sit in a leather armchair across from his desk, pushing a thick blue-bound project proposal toward her. The Kowalski Trust is a $450 million urban revitalization project aimed at building affordable housing, medical clinics, and vocational centers in West End. The International Investment Board representing the Kowalski family wants a project director who truly understands the community, rather than just corporate profits. I have reviewed your preliminary risk assessment report, Marcie, and I am appointing you as the lead project director for this proposal. Marcie looked at Julian in stunned disbelief, her hands trembling slightly as she touched the heavy blue cover of the official proposal document. Mr. Sterling, this is a multi-million-dollar international initiative that could define the future of our entire real estate division over the next decade. I have only been with Sterling Capital for 6 months, and senior analysts like Chadwick Hayes have been preparing for this position for years. Are you truly confident that I am qualified to lead a project of this massive magnitude before the international board? Position titles and corporate tenure do not guarantee leadership, Marcie, but lived experience, genuine empathy, and unyielding honesty do. You know West End because you lived its struggles. You know what those families need, and you have proven that you cannot be corrupted by greed. I am not offering you this assignment out of charity, but because you are the only person in this building uniquely qualified to deliver real results. Marcie picked up the proposal, looking out the floor-to-ceiling window at the distant rooftops of West End, where her journey had begun. She felt the heavy burden of responsibility resting upon her shoulders, knowing that failure would not only destroy her career, but also deny vital resources to thousands of struggling families. She looked back at Julian, her dark eyes flashing with a fierce, unbreakable commitment that erased every trace of self-doubt. I will lead this project, Mr. Sterling, and I will ensure that Sterling Capital delivers a proposal that honors both our business standards and the human dignity of our community. Marcie Vance spent the next 3 weeks walking the rain-slicked streets of West End, carrying a worn leather binder filled with community survey forms. She did not sit in an air-conditioned office relying on sterile computer algorithms or outdated government demographic reports. She spoke directly with local church leaders, small bakery owners, single mothers, and retired construction workers living in decaying apartment blocks. She listened intently to their stories, recording every single concern regarding rising rent prices, failing public clinics, and a severe lack of youth vocational training centers. Most corporate real estate developers come into our neighborhood with pre-drawn architectural blueprints and arrogant smiles. They tell us what they are going to build, but they never bother to ask us what we actually need to survive. I am asking you today what you need, because Sterling Capital wants to build a partnership with this community, rather than just another commercial profit center. We need a modern community health center, closer than 12 miles, affordable housing that normal working families can pay for, and clean schools for our children. While Marcie gathered ground-level data, Chadwick Hayes spent his late evenings inside his darkened corner office, consumed by intense bitterness and green-eyed envy. For 8 long years, Chadwick had sacrificed his weekends, missed family birthdays, and played corporate politics to secure the senior vice president nomination. Now, a former grocery store janitor with zero corporate tenure was standing in his way, threatening to capture everything he had ever coveted. He realized that if Marcie successfully delivered the $450 million Kowalski Trust deal, her permanent corporate elevation would be guaranteed forever. At 11:45 on the night before the final presentation, Chadwick discreetly used an administrative override keycard to access the secure presentation server. He opened Marcie's finalized financial projections folder, altering key structural formulas within the dynamic spreadsheet files. He artificially inflated the projected construction cost margins by 34.5%, creating a massive unexplained deficit that made the proposal look mathematically incompetent. He saved the corrupted files over her original work, leaving no visible trace of his malicious intervention before slipping out into the night. The grand boardroom on the top floor of Sterling Financial Tower was packed with international investors, corporate executives, and board members at 9 o'clock sharp on Thursday morning. Mr. Henryk Kowalski, the 82-year-old founder of the Kowalski Trust, sat at the center of the executive table alongside his legal team. Julian Sterling sat nearby, his expression calm and confident as he looked at Marcie standing proudly behind the main oak speaker podium. Marcie took a deep breath, smoothing her crisp black suit trousers before clicking her remote to project the opening financial slides onto the massive high-definition display screen. Good morning, distinguished board members and esteemed representatives of the Kowalski Trust. Today, Sterling Capital presents a revolutionary model for urban revitalization that prioritizes long-term community value, fiscal integrity, and sustainable growth in West End. She clicked to the third slide, preparing to walk the board through the detailed construction cost analysis that she had spent 72 straight hours perfecting. Suddenly, her heart dropped into her stomach as her eyes caught the primary financial total displayed in bold crimson numbers across the screen. The screen showed an astronomical infrastructure cost of $189 million, a figure $55 million higher than the audited numbers she had personally verified midnight yesterday. She froze, her pulse racing violently against her throat as cold sweat formed at the base of her neck. From the back row, Chadwick Hayes leaned against the wall with a faint, imperceptible smirk playing upon his aristocratic face. He watched Marcie falter, anticipating the exact moment when she would stumble over the contradictory numbers and expose her lack of corporate competence. Julian Sterling leaned forward in his leather chair, his sharp eyebrows knitting together in sudden concern, as he noticed the sudden silence stretching across the room. The international investors began whispering among themselves, shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they awaited an explanation for the wildly inflated construction figures. Marcie took a slow, deep breath, closing her eyes for 2 long seconds as she confronted the critical choice looming before her. She could easily pretend not to notice the discrepancy, talk around the inflated figures, and hope that nobody on the audit committee would ask technical questions until after the contract was signed. Or she could tell the absolute truth right now, risking her own career and reputation to preserve the moral integrity of her presentation. She opened her eyes, looking directly into the inquisitive gaze of old Mr. Kowalski. Distinguished members of the board, I must halt this presentation immediately and offer my deepest personal apologies to everyone in this room. The financial projections currently displayed on this screen do not match the verified audited figures that I personally calculated and approved last night. There is a critical, unexplained discrepancy of $55 million in the construction budget line items, and I cannot in good conscience continue this briefing using inaccurate data. A loud, collective gasp echoed through the crowded boardroom as several board members exchanged looks of utter disbelief and mounting outrage. Chadwick Hayes stepped forward from the back wall, his voice dripping with theatrical concern as he addressed the room. Mr. Kowalski, I deeply apologize for this severe embarrassment on behalf of our research division. Miss Vance is clearly overwhelmed by the immense complexity of an international transaction of this scale, given her extremely limited corporate background and lack of analytical training. I suggest we pause this meeting, allow Miss Vance to step down from the project, and permit me to present our standard commercial package instead. Julian stood up from his chair, his tall frame radiating intense authority. But before he could speak, Mr. Kowalski raised his hand to silence the room. The elderly philanthropist leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes locked entirely onto Marcie's pale, resolute face. Miss Vance, in my 45 years of evaluating multi-million-dollar corporate investment proposals, I have never seen a project director stop their own presentation due to an honesty concern. Most executives in your position would have lied, talked around the errors, or prayed that our financial auditors would not notice the discrepancy until the deal was sealed. Why did you choose to stop your own briefing when doing so could cost you your career? Mr. Kowalski made a sacred promise to this company, to Mr. Sterling, and to the people of West End that I would operate with absolute transparency and truth. I would rather be fired today for telling the truth than succeed by presenting a lie to people who are trusting us with their future. If you will grant my team 48 hours, I will personally locate the cause of this data error and deliver the correct figures. If those true numbers are not satisfactory, I will willingly accept full personal responsibility and resign from Sterling Capital immediately. Mr. Kowalski stared at Marcie for 3 long, agonizing seconds before a warm, genuine smile slowly spread across his weathered, lined face. He slammed his hand onto the mahogany table with a resounding thud that startled every corporate executive sitting around the room. We do not need 48 hours, Miss Vance, and you certainly will not be resigning from this firm today or any time soon. My family came to this country 60 years ago, looking for business partners who understood that development is not just about concrete and profit margins. It is about human trust, personal honor, unyielding moral character. You have just demonstrated more genuine integrity in 5 minutes than most global corporations manage to display in 50 years. Sterling Capital has won the Kowalski Trust contract, Miss Vance, on the sole condition that you remain the lead project director through its completion. Within 3 hours of the Kowalski Trust presentation, Julian Sterling's internal cybersecurity team completed a digital audit of the server logs. The forensic review pinpointed Chadwick Hayes's exact administrative credentials, overriding Marcie's files at 11:45 the previous evening. Before sunset, corporate security escorted Chadwick out of the Sterling Financial Tower, while local authorities processed formal charges for corporate sabotage and fraud. He walked out in handcuffs, his arrogance completely shattered by the very greed that had consumed his soul. Why did you do it, Chadwick, when you already had every advantage this world could possibly offer? Marcie asked the quiet question as she watched him stand near the security desk in the marble lobby. Chadwick refused to look her in the eye, his face pale with humiliation as the police officers led him toward the waiting cruiser. Marcie felt no malice or bitter triumph toward her fallen rival, only a profound sense of sadness for a man who had traded his integrity for ambition. She knew that true failure was not losing a job, but losing one's humanity in pursuit of wealth. 6 months later, the Kowalski Trust project broke ground in West End, laying the foundations for modern housing complexes, free pediatric clinics, and community centers. Marcie managed the initiative with unprecedented efficiency, ensuring that local minority contractors received 45% of all construction subcontracts. Her leadership style was grounded in active listening, deep humility, and an unwavering commitment to the dignity of every working person. Within a year, she became one of the most respected community development directors in the entire southeastern region. One bright Saturday morning, Julian and his mother Evelyn invited Marcie and little Maya to a quiet suburban neighborhood in East Point. The sleek black car pulled up in front of a beautiful, single-story red brick house with a white picket fence and a spacious green lawn. Maya gasped in pure delight as she saw a wooden swing set hanging from a large oak tree in the front yard. Marcie looked at Julian and Evelyn in confusion, wondering why they had brought her to this quiet residential street. Julian stepped forward, pulling a heavy brass key alongside a stamped legal deed from his inner jacket pocket. He placed the key gently into Marcie's trembling palm, folding her fingers over the metal with a warm, brotherly smile. This house is yours, Marcie, fully paid for with a clear title registered in your name and Maya's name. There is no landlord, no monthly rent balance, no fear of eviction notices, and no unpaid utility bills ever again. This is not corporate charity, nor is it a hollow handout from a wealthy benefactor. This is a permanent investment in a human being who reminded this company that goodness is the highest form of wealth. Marcie stared at the brass key, tears welling in her dark eyes as memories of her desperate nights in the cramped basement flooded her mind. She remembered counting $14.25 in the freezing rain while her daughter wheezed on an unraveling twin mattress. She looked at Evelyn, who wrapped her warm arms around Marcie's shoulders in a deep, tight, maternal embrace. 1 year ago, Marcie, you spent your very last $3.85 so an old stranger would not be humiliated in public. Today, we are giving you a permanent home, not because you earned it through financial transactions, but because you lived with honor. That simple loaf of cornbread was the most expensive meal anyone ever bought for me, because it cost you everything you had in your pocket. 5 years passed swiftly across the city of Atlanta, bringing immense growth and transformation to Sterling Capital and its community initiatives. Marcie Vance was formally appointed as the Chief Executive Officer, of the newly formed Sterling Community Foundation, overseeing a $200 million endowment. She wore tailored silk suits now, yet her heart remained as grounded and accessible as the day she held a mop in Midtown Market. She made a sacred rule never to make a major development decision without visiting the working streets first. On a rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 5 years after her life changed forever, Marcie walked into Midtown Market wearing a rain trench coat. She walked past aisle 4, stopping near the front cash registers where a young African-American janitor was mopping the floor. The young woman looked exhausted, her posture slouched as she squeezed dirty water into a yellow bucket while holding a prescription bottle in her pocket. Marcie walked over to her, her heart swelling with deep, familiar empathy as she recognized the unspoken burden of sacrifice. "Are you doing all right tonight, young lady?" The girl looked up, her eyes widening in instant recognition, as she identified the famous CEO whose picture graced local news publications. "Miss Vance, I am fine, just trying to finish my shift so I can buy my mother's medicine before the pharmacy closes." "I know who you are, Miss Vance. Everyone in Atlanta knows the story of the janitor who built a multi-million-dollar legacy. I am not special, my dear. I was simply blessed that someone saw my humanity when I had nothing left in my pockets." "What is your name?" "My name is Keisha." "Keisha, the Sterling Community Foundation operates a full university scholarship program for hospitality and maintenance workers who want to earn their business degrees. Here is my personal card, and I want you to call my office at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning so we can cover your tuition." "Why are you doing this for me, Miss Vance, when you do not even know who I am?" "Because 5 years ago, I gave away my last $3.85 to a stranger, and she taught me that kindness always finds its way back home. Give your time, give your heart, give whatever small thing you have, and trust that the world will return it to you 1,000 times over."